Before we get started, a quick warning. This episode contains descriptions of violence and gay slurs. It may not be appropriate for all listeners. It's election night. Did you have any nerves?
I wanted to vomit. Nerves doesn't even begin to cover it.
On November 7th, 1978, David Mixner was in Los Angeles at the Beverly Hilton Hotel with thousands of other gay activists. They'd been working tirelessly for months, fundraising and door-knocking, all in the hope that this night would be a celebration, the moment they defeated John Briggs and stopped the anti-gay backlash that was sweeping the country. Now, all they could do was wait for the polls to close and the results to come in.
It was still kind of primitive back then. We sat in a back room with a bank of phones getting returns from around the state.
They'd identified 10 districts as bellwethers, conservative or progressive areas where a swing in an unexpected direction might help predict the broader outcome. Every time a vote total came in, their 1970s version of Steve Kornacki would take over.
He had the central board where we would analyze it and decide whether that was a good sign or a bad sign.
We were always looking for things for volunteers to do. Well, I was so happy we had these volunteers that I could say, you know what I really need you to do is blow up balloons.
Activist Gwen Craig was at the headquarters of the group she helped lead, Harvey Milk's San Franciscans Against Prop 6.
And so the place was just festooned with balloons and everything. And we had a big thing of them ready to drop if the results were good.
The party's decorative centerpiece was a big poster of the Statue of Liberty holding a No on 6 sign over her groin. Someone told a reporter that the sign was strategically placed to cover the jockstrap Lady Liberty was wearing.
People were just there waiting for results and hearing them and either getting excited or getting nervous or whatever throughout the night.
So they had a big blackboard, the kind that you could move around, and chalk. Squeak, squeak, squeak.
The teacher and activist Tom Amiano was at the same party as Gwen.
Then they had the counties, so you'd be there. Siskiyou County, 55 to 40-something.
This has to happen. We cannot lose.
Sue Englander was at the San Francisco headquarters of the leftist anti-Briggs group, Bakabi.
It was packed. There were television cameras. I wouldn't say we were fearful, but we were apprehensive.
I was on pins and needles.
This wasn't just another campaign. This was literally a referendum on if I had a right to be an American.
Some of the early returns weren't looking good.
And we were very despondent. I remember one guy started to cry. Because, you put your whole soul into it. What the fuck is wrong with California?
The tension was immense.
So tense, emotional. And then in come L.A. And L.A. was like 2-1 in our favor.
Within an hour, it was clear that we were winning.
And when we saw that John Briggs was losing his own district, and then that's when we went out and proclaimed the victory.
State Senator John Briggs has just conceded the
Oh my goodness, the place went mad.
The crowd went crazy.
Just over the top. Over the top.
There was such jubilation. Grown men cried, hugging and kissing.
They were dancing. They had to shut down Santa Monica Boulevard because people were dancing in the streets.
They say happiness happens in moments. And that was truly a happy, happy moment.
At the San Franciscans Against Prop 6 party, Gwen Craig had helped plan a victory surprise.
So what we had done was had the San Francisco Gay Marching Band hidden down in the basement. And when they called it that we had won, they came marching up the stairs. Horns, drum. It was phenomenal. And the TV cameras, which were all there, loved it. Loved it.
Said one cheering celebrant, it's obvious gays have a lot of friends in California. Barry Peterson, CBS News, San Francisco.
Wait, so if you had lost, the band would have just stayed down there?
You know, I thought about that later now. What were we going to do if we had lost? I guess we would have just opened the back doors and said, go home, go home.
That night, there was no need for a backup plan, and the parties kept growing.
We were out in the street, too. You know, we went up to Castro Street. There was a big celebration. I remember shouting. I remember speeches.
I mean, it was like New Year's Eve.
Buoyancy, effusion, and clapping, and can you believe it? Pass the bong.
I remember a new day. A new day.
For the first time in our lives, we felt like winners.
What did you do that night? Did you go to a party or?
I had sex. Victory sex. Good sex.
This is Slow Burn, Gays Against Briggs. I'm your host, Christina Cauterucci. For gay Californians, November 7th, 1978 was a moment of triumph and validation. After a year of fear and anxiety and relentless hard work, they crushed the Briggs Initiative by more than 1 million votes. The final margin was 58% to 42%, a stunning reversal of the early polls. Gay activists pulled off a victory that once seemed impossible, and now they could start dreaming bigger about what gay life could look like in a country that recognized their strength. But the promise of November 7th wouldn't last, because everyone who spent that night celebrating their win was about to suffer a devastating loss.
He gave everything to the campaign, including, it turned out, his life.
This is episode 6, The Murders at City Hall. This episode is brought to you by ZBiotics. Let's face it, after a night with drinks, it's tough to bounce back the next day. You have to make a choice. You can either have a great night or a great next day. Introducing ZBiotics. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. ZBiotics produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just make sure to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Go to zbiotics.com/slowburn to get 15% off your first order when you use slowburn at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/slowburn and use the code SLOWBURN at checkout for 15% off. While gay Californians tore it up in the Castro and Beverly Hills on election night, it was a very different scene on the losing side of the Briggs Initiative.
In Southern California, they sang hymns at the headquarters of John Briggs, the conservative state senator who authored the measure.
We were at South Coast Plaza Hotel in Orange County.
John Briggs' son, Ron Briggs.
And around 11 o'clock or so, it's pretty clear we lost.
John Briggs hadn't just lost. He'd gotten clobbered on an issue that just a few months earlier looked like an easy win. But on stage, with an American flag behind him, he promised that his anti-gay crusade was just beginning.
I will provide the leadership to continue our fight to protect our children, to defend our families, and to restore decency and morality to California government.
Ron says his dad didn't wallow in defeat, because on the night of November 7th, 1978, John Briggs was still a winner.
Dad came out and said, well, it's been a good night for the people of California. We have a death penalty.
On the same day that Californians voted down Proposition 6, they also cast their ballots on the other Briggs Initiative. That one was Proposition 7 to expand the use of capital punishment in California. And it passed easily with 71% of the vote.
Always talk about the good, not the bad. Yeah, we lost Prop 6, but you know what? We got Prop 7. Yay!
This is from the day after the election.
When I interviewed the lesbian activist Ruth Mahaney, she showed me a clipping from a Sonoma County newspaper.
The headline is Death Penalty Initiative Wins by Large Margin. And this is a quote. "I'll be known as the man who ran Proposition 6 so I could get Proposition 7 through without a fight."
Do you think he was just saying that to cover his ass, though? It really does seem like he thought Prop 6 would win.
I think he probably did, but he also was really happy to sneak this one by.
Everyone I spoke to who knew John Briggs says the gay teacher ban wasn't just a ploy to distract from Prop 7. He thought Prop 6 would pass easily. But Briggs wasn't a charismatic spokesperson like Anita Bryant, and he didn't have the political savvy of the conservatives who won their anti-gay referendum in Eugene, Oregon. In the end, Briggs underestimated the gay activists who joined forces to stop him. He also had no idea that his first round of petitions would get thrown out, delaying the Prop 6 vote by a crucial 6 months.
That gave the gay community time. And in that time, they coalesced. They created this political structure that's just been a juggernaut ever since.
It was a watershed moment for us to learn how to play politics, retail politics, door-to-door canvassing.
That's Cleve Jones, Harvey Milk's intern at City Hall.
And, I'm a fairly cynical old thing at this point, but, there's nothing like that power of that face-to-face, eye contact, human to human. This is wrong. Please don't do it. That's how we won.
Cleve and the other activists told me it wasn't just smart campaign tactics that helped the gays defeat Briggs. There was something else to it. Something that in the 1970s felt totally new.
There was a feeling of solidarity. We never had that before. Everything had to be hidden.
A belief that we were worthy human beings, worthy of fighting for, worthy of standing up for ourselves. That spirit took hold from day one and just grew and grew and grew.
The campaigns, the ones that were really well organized, I think really gave people a clear idea of what they could do. Everybody told you that if there was somebody you failed to come out to, or a door that you didn't knock on, it could make the difference.
The days after gay activists defeated Prop 6 felt full of possibility and hope.
Indeed, gays have generated a great deal of political clout. If the gays vote together, their vote could decide the next mayor of San Francisco.
But the way Harvey Milk saw it, this wasn't a time to stop and revel in their success. It was a chance to accelerate.
A lot of people joined us and rejected Proposition 6, and now we owe them something. We must continue to speak out, and most importantly, every gay person must come out.
In his victory speech after the Briggs vote, Harvey called himself a sore winner. He was worried that gays would get complacent when they still had so far to go in their pursuit of equal rights and political power. He had much bigger ambitions for his community and for himself.
People were already talking about him possibly running for mayor. So he was now poised to do anything he wanted.
It helped that San Francisco's current mayor was on Harvey's side.
And I have to list Harvey as among my most ardent and devout supporters.
George Moscone was a powerful progressive force in California politics. He'd been a city supervisor and the majority leader of the state Senate, where, as you heard in our first episode, he helped repeal the ban on sodomy.
Since the time of his first election in 1963, he has built his reputation on his support for the poor and the downtrodden.
I want to see a San Francisco in which a variety of neighborhoods are encouraged to flourish so that they assume a magic and magnetism all their own.
On the night gay organizers beat the Briggs initiative, Moscone marveled at how they had changed Californians' hearts and minds.
This is your night, liberty and freedom for all, forever. Right on.
He exuded this warmth and exuberance, and he was a master politician.
In the fall of 1978, Harvey Milk felt like he and George Moscone were building something together, an unstoppable coalition of gays, union members, people of color, senior citizens, feminists, and environmentalists.
And Harvey, he said, we just really impressed the powers that be. And, now the mayor has become such a partner of ours.
Gwen Craig remembers Harvey telling her that they were on the verge of really changing the city for the people who needed change.
He was just so jazzed about this whole vision for the future of what was going to be possible.
Something else was playing into Harvey's bullish outlook on the future of San Francisco. Just 3 days after the Briggs vote, one of his biggest political rivals suddenly left the picture. His colleague on the city's Board of Supervisors, Dan White.
Well, I see naked men walking around, naked women walking around, and this is a problem. We wouldn't allow it for any other parade in San Francisco, and it should not be allowed for the gay parade.
San Francisco was pretty liberal, except for one conservative area.
Historian Lillian Faderman.
And that was the district from which Dan White was elected. Part of his promise to the district was to get rid of the perverts and social menaces in San Francisco.
Dan White had won his seat on the Board of Supervisors 1 year earlier in 1977, in the same election as Harvey.
He was a high school graduate. He was not particularly intellectual.
There's basic differences, political, ideology, I'll get it, political opinions, let's say.
He was very handsome, but I think he felt that he was out of his league.
People ask me, are you having fun? And that's the furthest thing from my mind. I could never describe it as fun, but it's quite an education.
He also thoroughly disliked Harvey Milk. They made some attempts to be friends. It never worked.
He was harsh. He had a very hard dislike of homosexuals.
Ron Briggs remembers Dan White as an enthusiastic supporter of Prop 6. In interviews, White sounded like he was reading talking points for the Briggs initiative.
You can have someone that's a transvestite, a man that, for his sexual kicks or orientation, whatever you want to call it, loves to dress up as a woman. If he is a qualified teacher, he can go into any school, and they can't refuse him.
Ron says that Dan White actually asked his father for a meeting to talk about helping out the campaign. The two men got together at a coffee shop, but John Briggs didn't come away wanting any kind of partnership.
No, my father probably went away with, this guy's really a nut job. He has potential of stealing my thunder, of coming up and saying things that are even more bombastic than I'm going to say.
After the Prop 6 vote, White couldn't help but feel out of touch with his own city, where 75% of voters rejected the Briggs initiative. He was also struggling financially. He'd been a firefighter when he got elected, but he wasn't allowed to hold a city job while he served on the Board of Supervisors. Now, he was making only $9,600 a year, about $47,000 today. That salary didn't feel like enough to support his wife and child, so the Whites also ran a baked potato and french fry stand at Fisherman's Wharf.
He realized that he couldn't keep going like this, and so he came to the mayor and resigned.
It was up to Mayor George Moscone to select White's replacement. For Harvey Milk, that was a political opportunity.
The liberals on the board asked George Moscone, and Harvey was in the forefront of it, to please appoint someone who was as liberal as George Moscone was, not someone like Dan White.
If Harvey got his way, the progressive wing would take control of the Board of Supervisors, seizing power from the more moderate members like board president Dianne Feinstein. Everything he'd been dreaming of, his vision for transforming the city, felt within reach. But the optimism of that moment was fleeting. because a horrifying tragedy was unfolding thousands of miles away.
Well, the bodies of at least 409 men, women, and children have been found at the Guyana jungle camp of People's Temple.
Jim Jones's People's Temple was headquartered in San Francisco and a major presence in the city's left-leaning political scene.
Jim Jones had been one of Harvey's supporters. Now, he had also been George Moscone's supporter.
Harvey Milk's aide, Ann Cronenberg.
I mean, we didn't know that it was a cult at the time.
In 1977, hundreds of members had left the Bay Area to form a commune in Guyana. Now, just 11 days after the Briggs vote, almost all of them were dead.
It now appears there may be as many as 780 bodies total found at the site.
Jones had instructed his followers to drink Flavor Aid mixed with cyanide. The final death toll was over 900. Most of the victims were Black. Progressive San Francisco was in total shock.
And there were people we knew who lived there and people we knew who died.
In less than 2 weeks, the promise of election night had been replaced by a feeling of horror and foreboding. Now the city was on edge. And then, on the morning of November 27th, 1978, a man showed up at City Hall with a gun. We'll be back in a minute. What's the one thing most history books all over the world have in common? They're seriously lacking in the melanin department. Wondery's podcast, Black History for Real, introduces you to the most overlooked Black history makers you should already know about. In recent episodes, they've told the story of the women of the Black Panther Party, like Assata Shakur, who's still a fugitive in exile, and Elaine Brown, the first female chairperson of the party. And there's so much more, like why a young Samuel L. Jackson got expelled from Morehouse College, and why country music keeps trying to keep Beyoncé out. Follow Black History for Real on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen to Black History for Real early and ad-free right now by joining Wondery Plus. Discover more to the story with Wondery's other top history podcasts, including American History Tellers, Legacy, and even The Royals.
For decades, LGBTQ+ people have been targeted, harassed, and attacked. But the Human Rights Campaign and its supporters kept showing up, fighting for the rights of all people to be safe being themselves. Now, with extreme legislative attacks on LGBTQ+ people across the country, they need our help to show up again. This Pride, donate by visiting hrc.org/givepride, and they'll send you their iconic equality sticker.
In the days after he resigned from the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, Dan White started to second-guess himself. His political backers felt betrayed that he'd just up and left, and they were hounding him about it. The Board of Realtors was mad because he'd been helping them fight rent control. Police officers were angry too because they needed him to push back against a racial discrimination suit. White felt the pressure, so he went to the mayor, George Moscone, and asked for his job back.
Moscone said it's going to be tricky because you resigned and the Board of Supervisors already accepted your resignation, but I'll think about it.
Lillian Faderman.
Moscone really was influenced by Harvey Milk, who said, you reappoint this guy, you've lost gay votes. You'll never get a single vote from the Castro or anywhere gays live in San Francisco.
It was a convincing political argument, and the truth was, Moscone was happy to replace Dan White with someone more liberal. So that was it. Dan White wouldn't be reinstated. But White didn't hear that from the mayor or from Harvey Milk. Instead, he got the news in a totally humiliating way when a radio reporter called him to ask for comment.
Harvey's, was a hard-boiled politician, and Harvey saw the opportunity to flip the 7-6 split in our favor on the board, and to Dan, that was just dirty tricks and a terrible blow to his very fragile ego.
When Cleve Jones arrived at work on November 27th, the mayor was set to announce White's replacement. It was the Monday after Thanksgiving, 3 weeks after the Briggs vote.
I got to City Hall. I had a key. I let myself in. And Harvey was stressed because of this whole situation with Dan White.
Cleve wasn't doing much to ease his boss's mind. He'd been doing opposition research, looking into potential competitors for Harvey's next campaign. But he'd left the file at his apartment on Castro Street.
And he was somewhat annoyed that it was not there. And he said, well, you need to go back and get that because I want to look at it this afternoon.
Cleve was trying to prove himself to Harvey. At 24 years old, he was still just an intern, and he wanted a full-time job.
And then I screw it up by leaving this file at home that he wanted. So he sent me back. But as I was leaving, he often caught himself, like he would start to lose his temper, and then he would stop and he would say, I'm sorry. And he just said, as I was going out the door, he said, I'm sorry, it's just been an awful week.
Cleve left City Hall to get the file. On his way back to the office, he stopped by a union picket line to give the strikers Harvey's regards. Just as he joined the picket, a city bus pulled up.
And somebody yelled at me out the window, Cleve, they shot the mayor. And my first thought was, who? Who was they? Who would want to kill George Moscone?
Cleve got a cab and raced to City Hall.
So I ran into the rotunda and saw all the cops massed around the mayor's office.
He had a key to the hallway where the supervisors had their offices.
So I let myself in, and I'm walking as fast as I could down the hallway. Harvey, where are you? And Dianne Feinstein came around the corner and rushed by me. And I could see there was blood on her sleeve. And I looked past her and I saw Harvey's feet sticking out. And I recognized the beat up secondhand wingtips that he wore as his dress shoes. I'd never seen a dead person before. I've seen a lot since, but I don't think any quite as horrifying, to see what bullets do. Right there, boom, there you are. And there's blood everywhere. And there was a cop there already who was turning him over and his head rolled. And it was just so bad.
What was going through your head as you processed it all?
That it's all over.
City Hall was now a crime scene. And it was up to Dianne Feinstein, now the acting mayor, to tell the world what had happened.
As president of the Board of Supervisors, it's my duty to make this announcement. Both Mayor Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk have been shot and killed.
Oh, Jesus Christ!
George Moscone had just turned 49. Harvey Milk was 48. They'd been working together to make San Francisco a more equitable place. Now, they were both dead, murdered at City Hall. It felt impossible to fathom.
We're back, and one of the hardest things in this job is to report news like this. We have just gotten news across the wire that both Mayor Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk have been shot, and they have been killed.
Apparently there was no connection here with the Jim Jones cult, which is based in San Francisco.
Harvey's aide, Ann Cronenberg, didn't get the news right away. She was on a flight to Seattle on the way to see her family. Anne had come out to them a few months earlier, inspired by Harvey's appeal. Her parents hadn't reacted all that well, and she was nervous about how they'd relate to each other when she got back home.
I expected to have my mom pick me up at the airport.
When Anne got off the plane that day, her mother was there, and so were her father, sister, and brother.
And I knew something wasn't right. My dad said, we need to tell you something, Anne. And they took me away from the crowds over to just a little corner of the airport, and they said, Harvey was assassinated this morning. It's been decades, and I still can remember it like it was yesterday.
Anne's dad told her Mayor Moscone was killed too.
I was devastated. I thought we had lost everything. I felt like it was the end of gay rights. Harvey was the father figure to me. I mean, he was everything. And I felt desperate. I was like, here I was in Seattle, and this happened in San Francisco, and I wasn't there. And my dad said to me, we've already booked a flight for you to go back to San Francisco.
For all they knew, there could have been a mass murderer on the loose. But Anne's family understood that she had to get back home. They knew how much Harvey had meant to her.
And my dad said, I think you could use a drink. And I said, I think I could too. And we went into the bar and I got a martini and just cried and held on to my family, which the fact that they were all there for me. And after this year that had been so tough, they were all there. I lost, part of the family I chose in Harvey, but I had my nuclear family I knew was going to be supportive.
Anne didn't know who'd killed Harvey, but she'd seen firsthand that he got a lot of death threats.
My first feeling, I really thought it was one of those crazies, that we had been getting the letters from. Never in a million years would I have thought it was someone I knew.
On the morning of November 27th, George Moscone was getting ready to name Dan White's successor. But before he could make the announcement, White snuck into City Hall through a basement window, walked to the mayor's office, and asked to see him.
Mel Wax, the mayor's press secretary, supplied the first facts.
We heard shots. We were unaware that the shots were coming from the back room, and we were unaware that there were shots at the time.
It wasn't until several minutes later that an aide came in for a scheduled meeting and found Moscone's body. By that point, Dan White had moved on to his next target.
White reportedly left the mayor's office through a back entrance, walked across City Hall, and demanded keys to the supervisor's lounge. White then let himself into the supervisor's chambers and made his way to the office of Harvey Milk.
White invited Harvey to come over to his old office, the one he'd worked in before he resigned.
Moments later, shots were heard and White was seen running out of the office.
Less than an hour after White fled the scene, he turned himself in to the police.
Ex-Supervisor Dan White is being held at the Hall of Justice on 2 counts of murder.
At City Hall that day, Cleve Jones spent hours in Harvey's empty office as the police processed the crime scene and collected the bodies. In that room, by himself, he felt the way he did when he was a gay teenager in Arizona, and the future looked empty.
I thought my life was over before it started. And then I came to San Francisco and I met Harvey, and he became like a dad for me and a leader for our movement. And also I felt ripped off, too. Harvey saw something in me. He was my mentor. And then he's gone, and it's over now.
Cleve had no idea what was going to happen to the movement Harvey helped build, but he knew where he would be that night. Earlier that year, Harvey had pushed Cleve to lead a series of marches from the Castro, protests against all the gay rights defeats they suffered before finally beating the Briggs initiative. Now, he trusted that the community would turn out to the place they always did, to remember their friend and leader.
There's a march, a candlelight march that's been organized.
Gwen Craig was in Hawaii with her activist friend Bill Krause when they heard the news. They got the next flight back to San Francisco and headed straight into the city to Market Street.
And we're waiting and waiting. And we said, wow, did nobody show up? Oh my goodness, this is terrible. And just when Bill was getting all despondent, all of a sudden we see a flicker up the hill. And then suddenly there's this wave of lighted candles coming towards us.
It's impossible to say how many people are here, but there are thousands and thousands of mourners.
It was different than any march I had ever been in. It was silent. The only sound you could hear was people crying.
It's still one of the most extraordinary things I've ever seen. Just huge numbers of gay men and lesbian women, but also all sorts of straight people and families marching in absolute silence to Civic Center and filling it with candlelight. It was so beautiful.
It made my grief even more profound. Just put a bigger lump in my throat to be with people and see, no, we're not alone. A lot of people care. A lot of people care.
That morning, I thought everything's over, and then I realized, standing in the middle of all those people, that I was wrong. It wasn't over. It was really just beginning. And I also knew that that moment was the single most important moment of my life. I knew who I was at that point. Just like, this is what you're going to do. This is what your life is going to be about.
And I thought, maybe there is a little bit of hope. Maybe it's not Harvey as one person. Maybe it's all of us.
We'll be right back.
Did you kill Marlene Johnson?
I think you're one of the first people to have actually asked.
From WBUR and ZSP Media, this is Beyond All Repair, a new podcast about an unsolved murder that will leave you questioning everything.
Somebody should be in jail for murdering my sister.
A woman who's never been believed.
As long as they think I have done this, then they're not looking for who actually did this.
And that's what makes it a cold case.
No, it's a botched case.
And a search for the truth, once and for all.
Wow, it just gets more interesting.
Beyond All Repair. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
Be careful. You're digging in a place that's been very peaceful for a while.
Do it anyway. Dig.
This has been recorded to be used only in the event that somehow or another somebody comes along and decides that the time has come to kill me.
On a late night 1 year earlier, on November 18th, 1977, Harvey Milk made 3 cassette tapes. He'd just been elected to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, and he had a premonition or fear that someone might take his life. While his friends and supporters were celebrating his victory, Harvey was planning for his own demise.
And I feel that my desires and thoughts should be at least known to people who have some decisions to be made in the event of my death.
Harvey gave one of those tapes to his personal attorney for safekeeping. On the day he was killed, the lawyer brought it to City Hall. Cleve Jones and the new acting mayor, Dianne Feinstein, were among the people who listened to it that day. Near the end of the recording, Harvey said he didn't want a memorial service.
I think if some people insist upon having something, that the thing that's done is to maybe replay the tape of myself and Briggs, which is in the back filing cabinet.
The tape was a copy of one of his earliest recorded debates with John Briggs.
We play that over and over so that people know what must be done. People know the sick minds of people like Briggs.
Harvey didn't get his wish. There were memorial services, and nobody played the recording of John Briggs. But that wasn't the only request he'd made. Cleve Jones again.
So when he makes the tape, he named, I believe, 4 people that he would approve of as following in his footsteps.
Harvey was thinking about who he'd want to take his seat on the Board of Supervisors. One of the people on his list was his aide, Anne Cronenberg.
Anne has strength. She learns fast. And I think she knows what the gay movement is about. I know she knows.
It wasn't until Harvey died that Anne found out about his succession plan.
I didn't know he had named me on that tape.
How did that feel?
It made me feel really special that, the love I had for Harvey and the admiration and respect that he also had it for me.
Harvey's tape also included a second list of names.
I remember also noting that after he listed who was acceptable to him, he also listed his enemies who would not be acceptable.
Due to necessity, I must name names. Rick Stokes, Jim Foster.
He did a posthumous preemptive strike.
That's the gayest thing I've ever heard.
It's so gay. It's like, don't fuck with me. I'll get you from beyond the grave.
When Harvey made those tapes, he assumed that George Moscone would be the one naming his successor.
I hope he understands. Hope he understands what's at stake. The movement.
But now Moscone was dead too. It would be up to his replacement, Dianne Feinstein, to make the choice. And she wasn't sold on Anne Cronenberg. Feinstein thought that at 25 years old, Anne was too young to step in. She was also disturbed by something Anne said in her eulogy at Harvey's memorial. It was a joke Anne made, and Gwen Craig remembers it brought a little levity to the service.
She said Harvey always said that if I spoke at his memorial, that I would either come in a dress or full leathers.
Soon after the memorial, Feinstein spoke with Anne about the possibility of her replacing Harvey.
And her first question to Anne was, Anne, what are full leathers? Do you own full leathers? Would you come to City Hall in full leathers?
I never wore leather pants, but I always had on a leather jacket because I rode a motorcycle.
She was so concerned about the potential of Anne being in full leathers that it seemed to dominate the conversation.
Anne also refused to promise Feinstein that she'd be loyal to her. That was the end of her candidacy. Instead, Feinstein chose one of the men on Harvey's list, a gay activist named Harry Britt.
I've listened to Harry and watched Harry at many meetings, and I think he would do very well.
With Harvey's replacement settled, the San Francisco government could start to function again. But no one could truly move forward, not the city, and certainly not Harvey's community, until his killer was brought to justice.
Today we went looking for clues to why White, the patriot, the athlete, the family man, the conservative citizen, would kill the mayor and a supervisor who opposed him politically.
Dan White had confessed immediately, first to his wife and then to the police. White had been a San Francisco police officer for years before he became a firefighter. The homicide inspector who took his statement was an old friend and his former softball coach. In the tape of his confession, you can hear White say that Harvey Milk smirked at him before he pulled the trigger.
He was in his office when I came into the supervisor's area, and I said, Harvey, can I talk to you? He walked into the room, and I shut my door, and he just kind of smirked at me. And then I just got all flushed and hot, and I shot him.
White said he was enraged that Harvey and George Moscone had conspired to keep him off the board of supervisors, and that they didn't call him personally to break the news. But it seemed plausible that he had a second motivation.
The one supervisor who consistently voted against homosexual rights, even voted against a gay rights parade this year, was former supervisor Dan White.
Many in the gay community feel that anti-gay prejudice may have prompted White to allegedly shoot Milk.
White also had his defenders, people who said he was an honorable man, or even that he'd been wrongly accused.
Dan was a great guy. He always treated me really nice. I just can't believe it. It's just terrible.
To me, I couldn't see Danny White doing anything like this, and even though I know it must be true from the reports and stuff, I still can't believe it, and I won't. Even if he's convicted, I won't believe it, really.
In the months before White was scheduled to go on trial, graffiti started popping up around the city saying, "Kill fags, Dan White for mayor." And San Francisco police officers closed ranks around their former brother in blue. They wore T-shirts under their uniforms that said, "Free Dan White," and started acting like they were out for revenge.
The cops were kind of unleashed and immediately seemed to be reverting back to the way they used to behave.
In March of 1979, a bachelor party, including a couple off-duty officers, descended on a San Francisco lesbian bar called Peg's Place. They shoved their way in, one of them yelling, "Let's get the dykes." They beat a bartender so badly, she was hospitalized for 10 days. When a woman threatened to call the cops, one of the men told her, "We're the cops."
I myself was shoved and called a faggot by a cop while sitting on the stoop of my building. "Move along, faggot." I said, "I live here." I said, "Move along."
Dan White's trial that spring would be about much more than the 2 assassinations that rocked San Francisco. It would be about how much a gay life was worth. The city's gay community had gotten one answer a year and a half earlier when the Briggs Initiative was just getting off the ground. As you heard in our first episode, in June 1977, a gay man named Robert Hillsborough was stabbed to death by someone who called him a faggot. Hillsborough's killer was sentenced to 5 years to life in prison. He'd end up serving just 4. Dan White's punishment had the potential to be much harsher. And in a twisted bit of irony, that was the doing of John Briggs.
Daniel James White is the first person in San Francisco to be charged under the new death penalty statute, better known as Proposition 7.
Briggs's Proposition 7 had just been passed by the same California voters who rejected the gay teacher ban. Now, prosecutors were required to seek capital punishment or life without parole for a longer list of crimes, including the murder of multiple victims and the murder of a public official for reasons related to his official duties. That meant White was doubly implicated. While Dan White had supported Prop 7, the district attorney in charge of White's murder trial opposed it. But now, the DA had no choice. In jury selection, prosecutors had to reject anyone who didn't support the death penalty, and the defense dismissed anyone who wasn't white or straight. The result was a 12-person jury that was way more conservative than the San Francisco norm.
These people all seem to be from Dan's world, so he sure did have a jury of his peers.
When the trial began, White sat behind bulletproof glass to protect him from spectators in the gallery. The prosecution presented its case in just 3 days, focusing on what White did and how he did it. When White's lawyer took his turn, he didn't try to refute any of it. Instead, he argued that White couldn't be held responsible for what he'd done.
And the jury heard 5 psychiatrists say that Dan White had lost control of his emotions to the extent that he couldn't have premeditated the killings or harbored malice toward his victims, states of mind required for murder convictions.
One of those psychiatrists brought up White's diet, specifically the Coca-Cola and Twinkies that he would gorge on whenever he felt depressed. The doctor argued that junk food can cause antisocial and even violent behavior, what immediately became known as the Twinkie defense. Harry Britt, Harvey Milk's replacement on the Board of Supervisors, said the gay community wasn't having it.
There's no doubt we're very tired of hearing outpourings of sympathy for this pathetic man and hearing him portrayed as a victim, as a nice guy who ate too many candy bars.
The defense's arguments raised more questions than they answered. If the killing wasn't premeditated, then why did White sneak into City Hall through a basement window, avoiding the metal detectors that would have caught his gun? And why did White even bring a gun in the first place, with extra bullets in his pocket? The defense called 17 of White's family members, friends, and colleagues to support his argument that he was too depressed to think clearly. The prosecution called no character witnesses to speak up for his victims.
Never, in those 3 weeks, was the jury reminded, in anything but a coldly analytic manner, of the 2 men who died, Mayor George Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk.
And when the prosecution played audio of White's tearful confession, it seemed to benefit his defense.
I never really intended to hurt anybody. It's just past several months, it got to the point I couldn't take it.
No one in the courtroom could hear that tape and not feel some empathy for White. The jury was certainly no exception.
Some jurors were openly crying as they listened to White's taped confession.
And so the rumbling began, he's going to get off, he's going to get off. And I kept saying, no, he's not going to get off. What are you kidding? I was certain he would be convicted of first-degree murder, 2 counts.
As the jury went off to deliberate, it felt like everything from the past 2 years had been leading up to this moment. The Briggs Initiative had intensified the gay rights debate, produced thousands of gay activists, and made Dan White feel like even more of an outsider. The campaign against Briggs, the killing of Harvey Milk, they were part of the same story. And the verdict that was about to come down would help clarify what that story meant.
Around 4:30 on May 21st, a reporter called from City Hall and said, Cleve, the verdict's in.
Cleve was in his apartment with a group of friends. They were getting ready for a block party the next day, what would have been Harvey Milk's 49th birthday. Cleve stretched the phone cord from the kitchen into the bathroom and closed the door.
And she said, you're not going to believe it. And I just got that cold dread in the pit of my stomach. And she said, he got off, Cleve, he got off. Manslaughter, both charges. And I vomited.
The reporter asked Cleve for his thoughts. He told her,
it means that in this country it's okay to kill faggots.
Cleve washed his face and brushed his teeth.
Shaking with anger, and by the time I got out of the bathroom, the apartment was filled with people.
They'd all just heard the news. Somebody came rushing in and told Cleve that 2 lesbian activists were giving a press conference outside at the intersection of Castro and Market. They wanted him to come speak, so he ran down and faced the reporters.
One of them said, Cleve, we know you have permits to close Castro Street tomorrow in honor of Harvey Milk's birthday. Is that when the reaction to the verdict will happen? And I looked into the camera and said, no, the reaction will be tonight.
Next time, on the season finale of Slow Burn.
The crowd has assembled, well over 5,000 people, I would estimate. Police have arrived at City Hall. They've got riot squad gear on.
And then all hell broke loose.
Can't wait for next week's episode? Listen to it now. Immediately unlock all episodes of Slow Burn Gays Against Briggs by subscribing to Slate Plus. Your subscription also gets you ad-free listening across all your favorite Slate podcasts, plus other member-exclusive content. Join now by clicking subscribe at the top of the Slow Burn show page on Apple Podcasts, or visit slate.com/slowburnplus to get access wherever you listen. This season of Slow Burn was written and produced by me, Christina Cauterucci. Slow Burn is produced by Sophie Summergrad, Kelly Jones, and Joel Meyer. Josh Levin is the editorial director of Slow Burn. Derek John is our executive producer. Susan Matthews is Slate's executive editor. Merritt Jacob is our senior technical director. We had engineering help from Patrick Fort and Madeline Ducharme. Our theme music was composed by Alexis Cuadrado. Ivylise Simones did the cover art, which features an image of Silvana Nova from a poster designed by Larry Hermsen and the Too Much Graphics Collective. We had production help from Emily Gaddick, Jude Jaffe-Block, Cambra Moniz-Edwards, Jared Downing, Dave Clark McCoy at Studio Pods Media, and Women's Audio Mission in San Francisco. Some of the audio you heard in our show comes courtesy of the Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, Transgender Historical Society. The recording of Harvey Milk's political will is from the Hormel LGBTQIA Center at the San Francisco Public Library. Special thanks to Isaac Fellman at the GLBT Historical Society, Rami Khalil, Fred Fegis, Rachel Strom, and Deb Greenspan, and Slate's Evan Chung, June Thomas, Brian Lauder, Katie Shepard, Seth Brown, Katie Rayford, Caitlin Schneider, Alexandra Cole, Joshua Metcalf, Heidi Strom-Moon, Hillary Fry, and Alicia Montgomery, Slate's VP of Audio. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week for our season finale, or right now if you're a Slate Plus member.